Nice, very green.
I miss Sari too, Prof. Ainol.
Oh my God, you're here. Oh dear. Very nervous. Oh dear.
Okay. All right. Okay. All right. Shall we start, Prof?
Yes, I'm ready.
All right. Alhamdulillah. Okay. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you very much, professors, doctors, brothers, and sisters, for joining our 9th session of e-learning clinic 2.0. And I'm very honored and very grateful for having Prof. Ainol with us today. Thank you very much, Prof, uh, for your kind preparation and then time for being with us today. And it's a very long waited topic actually, Prof. There has been so many questions on this, so please anticipate a long Q&A question and answer session. And we also have about 500 registered for this session. Okay, so some are actually streaming or watching the session through YouTube. So inshallah, I will try to collect all those questions that comes on the chat session and on the chatting room as well as on the YouTube platform, inshallah. And to add the barakah to our session, as usual, let's start with Al-Fatihah. Amin ya Allah ya Rabbal Alamin. Okay, again, thank you, Prof. And inshallah, we can start the session. The session is yours. Thank you.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahirabbil alamin wassalatu wassalamu ala asyrafil anbiya wal mursalin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajmain. Allahumma rabbi shrahli sadri wa yassirli amri wa hlul 'uqdatam min lisani yafqahu qawli. Actually, I'm so very nervous. This is my first time doing an online presentation, but I will try to do my best. So I have, in a way, been given this topic by my good friend, Prof. Nolida, um, and I. Tak dapatlah video attendance tu. Can you all hear me clearly? You all hear me?
Yes.
Yes, Prof. Yes.
So I don't know. Let me share my screen. Okay. So I've been given this topic. I hope it is something that all of us can benefit, if not to do something during this pandemic time in terms of the new ERTL, emergency remote teaching and learning, as well as remote assessment procedure that we have to go through. But anyway, I think before I go into designing and implementation and as well as planning, I would like to take like 5 minutes to just go through with all of you in terms of the basic principles and the background of alternative assessment. Yeah? Because I think many of us, I think, are interested. 500 of you are interested on alternative assessment because of the situation that we are now. We have to look for alternatives types of assessment because we cannot have the students to come to our classroom and do our assessment. Or there are many reasons where we cannot do the assessments that we have stipulated in the course outline. So that's what these are the things that I want to do. And like I said earlier, so I'll spend 5 minutes for us to just have a self-reflection on why is it that we want to go into alternative assessment. So we must understand the principles first. Okay. So in this, I was asking these 3 questions that we all have to know. What are alternative assessment? What is the principle? What are the principles behind? And then why is it that we're looking for alternative assessment at this point of time? Okay? Because perhaps if we know all these principles of alternative assessment, perhaps the alternative assessment is not the alternative to what you are looking for at this point. Okay, so let me go straight to the principle. Now, can alternative assessments replace your final examinations? I think many of us are here or are interested to listen to this talk because I think many of us are looking for alternatives to final examinations that should take place in 6 or 7 weeks, but because we don't know whether students are going to come, so therefore perhaps the final examination cannot be done. So is alternative assessment a choice? Okay. Now, before we can answer this question, we have to understand the principles of alternative assessment. And perhaps after understanding, you will have a decision that whether or not your final examination can be replaced by alternative assessments. Okay. Now, by definition, alternative assessment are methods that you choose to find out about what students know. Okay? Not just that, but also what is it that they can do that show their growth in the learning, and therefore can inform us of the instruction that takes place in the semester. And more importantly, alternative assessment, they are not standardized and they are not the traditional pen and paper tests. So if you want to go for something that the students have to sit in front of the computer because they cannot come to your class now, and then they have to answer questions, and the questions are 10 questions, and then they have to click on the screen the answer. So that is not alternative assessment, because alternative assessment are not standardized. Okay, so what are the other principles of alternative assessment? Now, I think the three important things to reflect on the principles of alternative assessment is, number one, it is not pen and paper which are product oriented. Okay, so when I mean pen and paper, some people asked me before, does that mean a project paper is traditional testing is a pen and paper? When we, the traditional definition of pen and paper is that students come to the examination, they are given papers. In the papers there are questions, and then they have to answer the questions. And the product is from the answers of the questions, so they will get marks. And these marks are translated to grades, right? Now, the alternative assessment is contrary to that. It is the opposite of product-oriented, because alternative assessment are both not just product, but also process-oriented. What does it mean? It means that instead of answering the questions in the paper, they are given tasks. Okay? And these tasks are based on authentic tasks. What does it mean by authentic tasks? These are tasks that they will do in the outside world, in the real world, whether it's in the job or in outside the classroom. These are things that they will have to engage in, okay, in which the knowledge that they gain from your classes will be used. So the second principle of alternative assessment is process and product oriented, and the tasks are real life tasks that you bring as an assessment. And number three, because it is process oriented, so there are some things that you want to measure or you want to enhance in the students are the things that are long-term outcomes. Okay? So now, if I compare that with final examination, for example, so when they answer the question, even if it is problem solving, in solving the problems, the time is limited. So you only use the knowledge and skill at that point of time to answer the questions in the stipulated time. But long-term, alternative assessment is beyond that knowledge and the skill that they can do in the examination hall. There are other things in the course outline that you mentioned that we write, we plan, that you want to develop in the students, that you want to give focus on in this assessment. So that is where, remember, we talk about the aids, skills, and the competency. So there are the competencies that you want to develop in the students where the traditional assessment cannot do. So that's where we go for alternative assessment. And I will talk about all those skills later in the other slides. Okay, so why do we need alternative assessment? So if I ask you the question now, so is alternative assessment an alternative to your final examination? So what is your answer? Anyone?
Okay, so anybody who would like to participate, please unmute your microphone.
So at this point of time, do you think alternative assessment, after reflecting on the principles of alternative assessment, do you think it can replace your final examination? Okay, never mind.
Yes.
Yeah, yes.
Dr. Ainol.
Okay, someone said yes, Prof.
Dr. Ainol,
Yes.
I think somehow if you ask us why do we need alternative assessment, I think the answer is very simple, because we are forced to do online learning. When we are doing online learning, we cannot use paper examination anymore. So we have to move into another alternative assessment. Somehow we have to go with the flow.
Okay, all right.
It might be wrong.
Yes, I know. I think all of the spirit behind looking for alternative assessment is because we cannot have the usual examination. Yeah, because students will be coming to class, and now that teaching and learning is in virtual online, so therefore perhaps alternative assessment is the way to assess. Okay, but the thing is, if you want to go for alternative assessment, you must make sure that they are equivalent to what you have now in your learning outcomes. Okay, so let me go. Maybe it will be clearer if I go through here on the principles again. So that's where I said just now, depends on your outcome. Yeah? So we know that the outcome of your courses contribute to the outcome of the program. So that's CLO contribute to PLO. And the program learning outcome contributes to after 5 years of graduation, which is the program objectives. Yeah. So outcome of courses. So if these are your students, yeah. So these are products of those different factories. So if the outcome of your course for the students the same with what you see in the product of this water, drinking water. Yeah, there are specifications that they have to fulfill in order to come up with the different products of water here. Right. So that's why we have the learning outcomes, and those learning outcomes are not specific to just knowledge, because we all know that in the learning outcomes there are also skills to develop, right? And also the other attributes, important attributes in the 21st century and attributes in the society that you also want to develop over the 5 years. So that's where we have the program learning outcomes. So knowledge is just one of the components or one of the things that you want to develop in each course. So if you have courses at each year, so all these courses not just contribute or develop how much they know in terms of content, but there are things like skills. So that's why you have all the MQA list of skills that you also have to develop. And because students are individuals, how much they know and how much they develop in terms of skills and how much they gather in terms of attributes are not the same. So the same as the unlike the drinking water product just now, the water is, pH is 7.0, so every bottle will be 7.0. Our students are human, so they are not the same in terms of knowledge, skills, and attributes. So that's where assessment comes in. So we have end of course assessment, and then we have instruction, and we also have the continuous assessment that assess how much of the knowledge and the skills and attributes that the students have developed. Okay, so why I show you also, these are the, so when we talk about this now, other than content, yeah? So MQA has specified for us that content is just one component that we have to develop. There are so many other skills and attributes that we have to develop in each course or in courses that contribute to the development of the person after 4 years. Okay, so how is it, therefore, information management and lifelong learning skills are developed in your course? So you will do the pedagogy for, appropriate for enhancing information management and lifelong learning skills. But at the same time, how much is it that you have to also answer the question, how much is it that they know about managing information and lifelong learning skills? So that's where assessment comes in. Okay? And that is where some types of assessments are not appropriate, particularly the traditional assessment that are not appropriate to assess the other domains, particularly the non-knowledge domains that you want to measure in your assessment. Okay, and in line with also the UNESCO education pillars, yeah, knowledge is just one component. There's 5 now. The old one is 4. So knowledge is just one part of the human development that any education should develop. But there are all the other skills and attributes that each course will also have to cater for in terms of developing the student's potential as an individual, as well as to know how much they have. So in other words, that's where the assessment comes into place. Okay, so the basic principle that differentiates the traditional assessment from alternative assessment is that alternative assessment is a choice. Assessment method that you choose should enhance learning. Okay, so what does it mean that assessment method that you choose of the many alternative assessments should enhance learning? It is through the process. Remember just now, the principle of alternative assessment is that it's not product-oriented, it is also process-oriented. So through the process of going through your assessment, so the tasks that you design, that they have to do, those tasks, the process that they have to go through actually enhance the learning process of the students. Okay, so because of that, it is not the same with the traditional assessment where at the end of the assessment, because it's product oriented, students only get grades. So we have in many of the course outlines, these are the 3 common ones that I see. We have midterm, we have quizzes, and we have final examination. At the end of the day, by doing for sitting for these 3 traditional assessments, students only get grades. Yeah? But in alternative assessments, such as portfolio, if you choose to do portfolio, or champion of portfolio is a Kuliah of Architecture, KAED. Yeah? And then there are many types of performance-based. When I look at the course outlines in the database of our university, there are lots of performance-based assessment that we've done. Yeah? So these are 3 main alternative assessments that the whole university have been doing. Okay? But we have to understand the principles of this alternative assessment. One is that whether it's portfolio, performance, or observation, these are tasks. They're not questions that we ask the students and the students answer, but rather tasks. And then by doing the task, students will go through the process. Yeah? And at the end of it, there product that they will showcase. Okay? And the process of going through the alternative assessment, by going through all the tasks that they need to do, is not about getting the grades, because in the process, learning takes place. And probably the last one, again, which is very important, is not merely assessing knowledge. Okay? Because remember just now when I show all the other components that you have to develop. So by going for alternative assessment, so we have all the other attributes and all the skills and other things that are important in education that we need to cater for will also happen when the students go through the process of alternative assessment. Okay? So any question or comment at this point? No? Okay.
So feel free to ask if there's any questions. I have unmuted all the
Okay, Assalamualaikum.
Waalaikumsalam.
It's okay, this is Aisha from engineering. I just want to ask, what do you mean by it's not product oriented? What do you mean by product oriented?
Okay, when it is product oriented, at the end of the day, you see, let me give maybe a simple example of looking at it is your final examination. So how do students get marks? Students get marks from what they give as an answer, right? So what they give in an answer is the product of answering the question.
Okay.
When we talk about alternative assessment, which is process oriented,
Yes.
students have to go through, in completing the task, there are processes, there are ongoing or continuous processes that the students have to go through in order to get to the output or product of the task. Yeah. So did I answer the question?
Assalamualaikum.
Waalaikumsalam.
Oh, Ainol, sorry.
Yes.
Nolida here.
Oh yeah, from Noli.
Thank you very much for doing this. As Mira said, it's very, been waiting. Many people have been waiting. And I am very, very happy that you actually highlighted that most of the courses in the university have actually done or are doing performance assessment. It's not something new to us, you know. I think the thing that throw everybody, a bit is how to translate that final examination, the content that they have for the final examination and the questions that they want to ask in the final exam, how to translate that into an alternative assessment. I think this is I believe that you will also highlight this later in the presentation, inshallah.
I will try, inshallah.
Inshallah. Thank you very much.
Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you, Prof. Noli. Yes. So that's the thing. I think most of us are here because we feel that we would like to, because there's not going to be the face-to-face final examination. So therefore, it's alternative assessment, the alternative, right? So that's where we have to be very careful. Yeah. Because if you, in designing your final examination, we have to go by the course learning outcomes, right? Because some course learning outcomes may not fit to be assessed through. So that's where you have to be very careful. Okay, so that is what I'm going to talk about later. But as Prof. Noli said earlier, so alternative assessment, the different types of alternative assessments that you have that are there are already done by all of us. So these are some examples that I get from the MQA website: written report, lab work, portfolio, oral presentation, internship, interview, field work, project work. We all have been doing this. So these are alternative assessments. Okay? And they follow the principle of alternative assessment. Why? Because it's process oriented. And in the process oriented, you don't just assess the knowledge that the students know from going to your classes or from attending your sessions, but They also develop the other skills and attribute, for example, IT skills. So that's why you see all the green skies there. So those are the other attributes that you develop when the students go through the tasks in the different alternative assessments. Say, for example, here, oral presentation. Okay, the output or the product is an oral presentation, but by going through the tasks to complete an oral presentation, they will develop the IT skills. They will develop, at the end of it, their communication skills. Why? Because they have to practice to present in 5 minutes or 10 minutes. Okay, and if you do the oral presentation, or the work for the oral presentation is done in a team or in groups, so therefore we also hope to develop the teamwork skills among the students. Okay, so all these green skies are very important for you to identify, for us to identify from the very beginning, because these make up what you want to assess in the students. So if in our presentation, IT skills and teamwork and spoken communication are important, so these are the things that you will give attention to in the product as well as the process. Okay? And I will show you how later. Okay? Which is I will show you how in terms of translating it in rubrics or in using checklists. Okay, so next. Like Prof. Noli mentioned earlier, so actually performance-based assessment assessment have been used interchangeably in the literature, in such that sometimes when we say performance-based, they also mean is alternative assessment. Okay, so performance-based assessment are authentic assessment in which the tasks that you give to the students reflect the true tasks, the real tasks that the students will have to do when they have graduated from your program or when they are outside your classroom. Okay, and two, it is not product oriented, so therefore the tasks will involve different processes. So that's why it says here, sets of strategies. Okay, so they will have to go through the process. They will apply the knowledge and the skills that are meaningful to engage them in their learning. Okay, and completing the task is not just the ultimate aim, but rather there will be things that you want to see along the way. So what is it that you want to see will define how is it that you want to assess the students. Okay. So I go straight to considerations. If you think that you want to go for alternative assessment or performance-based assessment, there are things to consider. The first one is, of course, like we said earlier, and like Prof. Noli said earlier, if you want to replace your final examination, please revisit your course learning outcomes to see whether, based on the course learning outcomes, alternative assessment or performance-based assessment can be used to replace your final examination. Okay. So I'll show you some examples here. I'm sorry, I take this from different course outlines that are in my file, and this is not biased towards or against any particular kuliah, but it just so happened that I have them easily accessible in my file. Okay, so in going back to consideration, first consideration in going for performance-based or alternative assessment is look back at your learning outcomes. Okay, so what do we do when we look at your learning outcomes? So we have the learning outcomes. The learning outcomes are actually divided into two components, two major components. One is the content, and number two is what is it that you want them to do with the content. Okay? So just as a reminder, what is a learning outcome? Learning outcome is how you want the students to demonstrate the knowledge or the skills that they have gathered from the sessions with you or from the teaching and learning experience with you. Okay? So how do you want them to demonstrate? So there are two components again. The orange colored, the orange colored words are the content. So that's the knowledge. So if you go by learning outcome number 1, so what is it that they've learned from you? Accounting theory, accounting policies, and accounting practices. Yeah. And what is it that you want them to be able to do? So that's the second component of your learning outcome. You want them to be able to describe the importance. Okay. And I presume this CLO is normally taken to be demonstrated in the final examination, right? Because describing importance of accounting theory, accounting policies, accounting practices. Now, this is easily tested in a few questions in a final examination. Okay. Now, the question now, if you want to go for alternative to final examination, how else can they describe the importance of accounting theory, accounting policies, and accounting practices, if not through answering question in the final exam? Okay. I don't have the answer, so you have. That's what we have to ask ourselves. So if these topics, these content topics have already been taught, and normally we want to know whether they know or how much they know of these topics through describing in the final examination questions. Now we don't have final examination. How best to make them demonstrate the ability to describe this content or these topics? Right? So then how best, that option there is the option suitable in terms of one of the methods in alternative assessment? Well, I don't have the answer. But at this point, if I just look at it, perhaps my answer is perhaps no. Okay? So perhaps not a project paper, perhaps not a presentation, and perhaps not a field work. But how else can you get them to demonstrate this ability? Okay, but let's look at learning outcome number 3. Okay? In learning outcome number 3, the same as number 1, there are two components in your learning outcome. One is the content. So what are the content? Accounting theories, accounting practices, and accounting theories and practices from the Islamic perspectives. Right? So those are the content. How do you, so in the sessions that you have, the online sessions that you have with them, they will gather this knowledge of accounting theories, accounting practices, as well as the Islamic perspective of these two components. But you want them to demonstrate, what you want them to demonstrate is examine critically cases and problems. Okay, so this is where I ask, if traditionally or in the past, you have one question in the final exam for LO3, okay, can you have something, a task that you give a student in such that when they do the task, they demonstrate LO3, okay, to replace those questions that you have in the final exam. So I'm not an expert in this area, in this accounting area, but perhaps I see as a possibility, yeah, because in critically examination examining cases and problems, I foresee that you don't want to just look at the ability to utilize the knowledge in accounting theories and practices, but the ability to look for sources from Islamic perspective. When you look for sources in the Islamic perspective, it's a lifelong learning skill. And in lifelong learning skill, you don't want, you cannot fairly assess that skill in a 3-hour examination. Sorry. Because normally in lifelong learning skills, you give them more time to demonstrate. So perhaps CLO3 can be taken up as a as a project paper or as whatever task for them to demonstrate their ability in this content. Okay, so maybe I want to just ask one question, and perhaps Prof. Nolida can come in. So, if you look at your course outline, you have access to your course outline there with you now. Do you possibly see some of the CLOs that are there in your course outlines, but they are normally assessed in the final examination, but you want to change them into an alternative assessment? So maybe we can do some sharing session there.
Assalamualaikum.
Hello?
Farida from Sapet. I'm just wondering what you have been saying about alternative assessments are similar to the other tasks that we have assigned our students to do for their the continuous assessment, that project, presentations and things. But we are at the point where we have already planned for our final exam, which mostly are product based, I think, oriented.
Yes.
So I think most of the performance-based tasks are all been taken care of for the assignments, yeah. And therefore, now we are having a problem to decide what to replace with the conventional final exam questions that we have with other things that are equivalent. Okay? And because maybe it's a bit too late to get them to do the alternative assessment as what you have defined earlier.
And also, okay, thank you for the question, Dr. Farida. Yes, indeed. So indeed, it's very true. The first thing that you said that you already have the CAM. So the spirit of your CAM is actually alternative assessment. In other words, CAM is not the same as your final examination because the spirit is not product oriented. That's why it's called continuous. And I suppose many of us have asked this, why is it called continuous? It's called continuous is because the assessment is done over a period of time, and it is also continuous because of the skill, because of the, it doesn't only assess the knowledge, but also the skills, the continuous skills that they will develop when they do the task in the camp. Okay, so to your second question, how do you change your final examination? So that's where you have to be fair to the students, because your final examination is product oriented. So if you want to go for an alternative to your final examination, so it must be in line with your course learning outcome. Okay? So it cannot go with a different spirit. So it cannot be a project paper, for example, because a project paper, I don't know, I must see your course learning outcome. So perhaps possible, but I strongly feel if I look at your course outline that is mapped against your final examination, then I'm quite sure that you should not go for alternative assessment to replace your final examination. But you can have assessments, other assessments, yeah, which I think I don't know whether Dr. Zainuddin has agreed, but there are other types of assessment like the take-home test, yeah, and also the product-based assessment that can be done online that will fulfill the course learning outcome. Okay? But what I will show you later is that I will show you some of the exam-like questions that I put in my alternative assessment, and I put it in the Pathbright to show you some possible ways that you can possibly do with your assessment. Okay, Dr. Farida, did I answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. All right. From Noli? From Noli, is there anything that
Yes, yes. Good answer. Alhamdulillah. You're doing mashallah, good job.
oops, alhamdulillah. Okay. So it's very important to go back to your course.
So, Ainol.
Yes. Yes, Dr. Zainuddin.
Assalamualaikum.
Like
Good job. I have two things here. I think there is a certain limitation to what we can do at the moment. If you see alternative assessment as a concept, then there is a different way of handling it. But I think most of our participants today, they are looking at alternative assessment as a quick fix because they already have their final exam. Now they just want to see if there is a medium. So what's the best way I can deliver this final exam to my students online? I think that's one. Number two, the limitation is that to those who are teaching subjects which are discrete in nature, for example, those people who are teaching subjects related to calculations, for example. So if the normal test is about calculating something, it's a bit difficult for them to turn it into alternative assessment. The third one is that I think this one, for this example on accounting, I think this can be applied. We have to understand that we do not have to have different tests for different course learning outcomes. If you want to turn it into something that is alternative in nature, you can have one task, and in that one task, you can ask your students to do things that will fulfill all the three course learning outcomes. I think that's one way of looking at it. Over to you.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Dr. Zainuddin. Right. So yes. So very aptly said that if you feel that what you're looking for is to have those questions that you want to ask the students, but they are not, they can't come for the face-to-face. Perhaps what you are looking for is a platform to do it, but not to change it into a kind of task-based as an alternative assessment. Okay, so that's where you have to make your decision. Only you know what's the best change that you need to do. Okay, so the two major things here. So one is looking at the platform for the examinations to take place, and the other one is looking for other ways to assess possibly the same content. Yeah. And like Dr. Zainuddin said, possibly the same content and catering for different course learning outcomes, which is what I'm going to talk about later. Okay, so this is again to show you example of learning outcomes. Learning outcomes are divided into two major components: the content, what is it that they learn from attending to your sessions or going through all the materials that you provide. So that's the one in red. But more importantly, in terms of check and balance, how much is it? How do you want them to demonstrate what they know and how much they know about this content? Is this task word here, debate issues. Okay, so this is task. So automatically, when I look at this learning outcome, I would assume that for this CLO, an alternative assessment is appropriate to be designed. Okay, all right. Now, because I think because we are so used to performance assessment because we've been doing it, so I would like to just go through, just making sure that the design of your performance assessment follow the principle. Okay? So the first thing in designing your performance assessment as an alternative assessment is defining your purpose. Okay? Stiggins, 1994, very well quoted literature on performance assessment and alternative assessment say, you've got to make sure what is it that you want to get the students to do in the task, and what is it that you want them to go through that you can assess. Okay? But I add on the last bit. What is it also through going through the task that you want to develop in the students at the end of the process, at the end of the assessment task. So that is very important in your design. After determining what is it that you want to assess, yeah, is choosing the appropriate assessment task or appropriate assessment activity. I have here, which I gathered from the different course outlines that I got from the different kuliahs in the university. Yeah, there are many. If I go through the list, there's so many, but these are the most common ones. Research paper, group project, needs analysis, proposal, presentation of a project, organizing a seminar, group presentation after doing a field work. Okay, so these are the assessment tasks that I mentioned earlier. Okay, an assessment task is just half of the job of designing an alternative assessment. Okay, so in other words, the first thing that you need to think about when you want to design your performance-based assessment is decide on the assessment task. So which one? Do I want to do a project work, or is it going to be organizing a seminar? So it all goes back to your course learning outcomes. Remember just now the course learning outcomes has that underlying words. So those underlying words determine how best or which suitable task can you choose as your assessment task. Okay, so if it says here debate issues, then probably an assessment task will be debate. Okay, conduct a debate. And then if it says here examine cases and problems related to accounting theories and blah blah blah, so perhaps the most appropriate assessment task is a project. Okay, a group project. All right. So in designing your task, unlike in final examination, you want them to just give the right answer. But in the assessment task, you have to identify not just the content, yeah, not just the right answer, not the content, but what is it that you want to develop when they do this task. So for example, in proposing a project plan. So in proposing a project plan, what involves in proposing a project plan? So they will have to do meetings. Okay, they will have to have drafts of minutes and blah blah blah. So all these things count for the next bit of your designing of your assessment of alternative assessment, which is the assessment tool. Okay, so after you have chosen one assessment task here, so that's what I said just now. For alternative assessment, as designing the task is just half the job, because the next thing that you have to design is the assessment tool. Okay, so again, these assessment tools I got from the list of the different courses that are there available that I could retrieve in IIUM course outlines. Okay? Ranging from the Gantt chart, journal, checklist, presentation checklist, rubrics. Rubrics are common, so many types of rubrics. Yeah, but this is to show you that rubrics is just one of the assessment tools that can be used to assess, to help learning in alternative assessment. There are many other assessment tools that you can choose. You can design, and it all depends on the question that I asked earlier in the slide, in the earlier slide. What is it that you want to develop in the students? The last question. when they go through your tasks. If you want to develop, for example, time management, so perhaps a Gantt chart should be one of the assessment tools in the project that you've designed as an assessment task. Okay. Okay. And if you want to develop, going back to, if you want to develop, what is it that you want to develop in the students when they go through these tasks? If you want to develop communication skills, then perhaps a presentation rubric is also on top of a Gantt chart. I also have a presentation rubric as a tool of assessment for this assessment task. Okay, now I pause there for questions or comments. Any comments? So you see here the difference between the traditional assessment. In the traditional assessment, students get question, they answer the questions, and then they get marks. Okay, and these marks are translated into grades. But in alternative assessment, because the spirit is assessment for learning and assessment as learning, so you design the task in such that there are assessment tools to help develop whatever that you want them to develop. If it is, for example, just now, I gave you the example of time management, and perhaps in the project, you want to also get them to produce a Gantt chart and see how they keep to the Gantt chart in order to see whether they can manage the time well in completing the task for the project.
Prof.
Yes.
Prof, I'm Hafiz from Allied Health Sciences.
Yes.
Kuantan. In my opinion,
yes,
those assessment that you have but to shown us more on the assessment of psychomotor and affective assessments. But how are we going to assess the cognitive assessment? As far as I know, the cognitive assessment should be assessed using exam.
Yes, exactly.
So how are we going to apply your suggestion in after the assessment for the cognitive assessment?
Thank you. Okay. So that's why in the spirit of the outcome-based education, development of a person through the course and the program and then for long term, it's not necessarily just cognitive and affective, but there are practical skills to develop and the lifelong learning skills to develop. Yeah, and in a way, you have to say that when you talk about cognitive, right? Cognitive is easily or very, wouldn't say easy, but aptly done through the traditional assessment. Okay? So that's why I said just now, it all depends on your course learning outcomes. For some course learning outcomes, it's heavily loaded on the cognitive and perhaps affective. Yeah, very cognitive based, very content based. For example, remembering facts. So, for example, the UNGS courses. I'm sorry, I have to say this. I'm sorry, I have to give the example of a UNGS, but maybe some of the UNGS courses or the basic first year courses are very heavily loaded with content, right? And if you look at the course learning outcomes of first year, the way it's worded, it's very cognitive based. So this is where the traditional assessment, the examination or exam oriented assessment utilized. Okay, but like I said, there are many other course learning outcomes that cater for beyond the cognitive development of the person or of the students. So that's where alternative assessment come into place. So did I answer your question, Doc?
So meaning that we need in future we need to what we call adjust our CLO, right?
It's very unfair for me to say at this point, yes. It all depends on what's the objective of your course. I know for certain that for first year, 1,000 something courses is very loaded with content. And you need to know that they know a lot. How is it that you need to know that they know a lot?
Yes.
You only know through the traditional assessment. You give quizzes, you give tests, right? And saying all this, I am not dismissing the value of traditional assessment. In fact, I am still for the traditional final examination to a certain portion, because the alternative assessment, okay, so if you go back to the alternative assessment just now, the alternative assessment is where students just don't get grades. What is important in the process of teaching and learning is that you want to monitor the students' progress, and you want students to not just get grades from you, but rather they also get feedback. So that's where your choice of assessment tools. So this second column is very important. Choice, and how many assessment tools do you use in your assessment task reflect how much you want to give to the students to help them in their learning. Say for example, for a project, for a project, I don't just give a final rubric, project rubric. I don't just give 4, okay? Because the final rubric is only for the product of the group project. But if I also ask the students to do Gantt chart, through the Gantt chart, I can see how students manage the time. And then I can probably also use a checklist. So a checklist also tells us and tells the students what are the things that they need to do and have not done yet, based on the checklist, in order for them to have a reflection of their learning in doing the task. Okay. And then if I end it with a presentation in the project, then probably I will also have tool number 8, presentation rubric. Okay. And in the presentation rubric, which I will talk later, if I have, inshallah, I have the time. So I'll talk about components of what needs to be there in rubrics in order for your rubrics to be beneficial to help students to learn. Okay. So Dr. Hafiz, just now, did I answer your question?
Yep.
Ainol, Dr. Ainol.
Yeah.
Can I respond to something?
Yes, please.
Okay, just now Hafiz was asking a question. I think if I'm mistaken, he said something like we need to adjust our PLO.
Yeah.
So we cannot adjust our PLO at the moment. But what we can do is that when we design the task, we have to make sure that the task fits into the LO and PLO, whatever that is. Yeah, so jangan ubah. Number 2, we have to be very careful when we want to give the ultimate grade to a student, whether it is A, B, C, or whatever. We have to be very sure that we have all the data and information before we can label a student as an A or a B or a C student. So that calls for us to get information about their ability cognitively. Can they do it orally? Can they do a test? Or how do they behave in a group project? So we need to be aware of that. The other thing was that while listening just now, I saw on the chat somebody was saying that open book might be the solution. So it's a very sticky issue because if we do open book simply for convenience purposes, as in our situation now, and we want to do open book as opposed to online tests or alternative assessment, it's not that easy. It could be very sticky and very tricky because the issue of validity. Validity will be very subjective. Okay.
Zainuddin, this is why you have to give one session on open book examination. Don't say
je. Oh, but anyway, that's my point. Okay, there is no one solution. This is not like by t-shirt pasar malam one size fits all, because like Prof Ainol said just now, you not only need to link your LO and the task that you give, you also need to use the appropriate what we call assessment tools to check. The instrument is very important. So if we are measuring our students by asking them to come up with the report, then what's the best way to measure the report? Is it using rubric? Is it even at that, if you want to use rubric, is it analytic or holistic rubric? So we need to be very careful here. Yeah, Dr. Prof Noli, I will consider that open book session. Thank you.
Alhamdulillah.
Thank you, Alhamdulillah.
Maybe next year.
Okay, thank you. So all right, so in short, again, to summarize the design of your alternative assessment, particularly the performance-based assessment, is that you've got to design both the task and the different assessment tools, depending on the choice of the assessment tool, depending on what is it that you want the students to demonstrate, and what is it that you want them to be able to reflect in doing the task. Okay, because at the end of the day, it's not about just getting the grades, but it is also about what kind of feedback the students get in their progress of learning. And at this point also is very important for me to also say that for certain courses, examinations or tests are still very important, because there are so many content. Perhaps for some courses, there are so many contents that the students have learned and must master, and therefore you need to know how much they know and how much that they don't know. So therefore, that is the reason why you have to have the examinations. And for other courses, even though if you have your chem 60%, yeah. So but the chem, because as I said just now, the principle behind the alternative assessment is that it is assessment for learning and assessment of learning. Sorry, assessment for learning and assessment as learning. So therefore, students don't just get grades, they get feedback. They get all the necessary guidance, okay, and reflections in order to do well. They have time. They have time to know their weaknesses and strengths, and you have time to know their weaknesses and strengths in such that, because it's continuous, they are able to improve themselves. So therefore, it is not uncommon, or in other words, it is common that students' chem marks are high, yeah, because they are given the opportunity, for example, through the Gantt chart and the checklist and the rubrics that you use in 3 stages of the task, they get information about what their weaknesses and strengths. So by the end of the 14th week, where they have to submit their project paper, they have already bettered themselves. They already made the necessary changes, the necessary, they know how to improve themselves in such that the final project is much better than the initial stage when they do the project. Okay, so therefore, it is common to see, I think, all of us probably will agree, common to see that the chem marks is always above 40. If it is 60, 40 something, 50 something, right? So that is where your final examination comes in. Final examination comes in because final examination is an individual effort, and it is, like I showed just now, is very cognitive based. Okay? It's very content specific competency. So that is where your final examination discriminate. For lack of a better word, maybe I should not use discriminate. This should distinguish, because if in your class your CAM marks are all 40 above and many 50s, I mean, it doesn't really distinguish students who are really good in the content or in all the outcomes of the course, then your final exam should be the one that discriminate or distinguish the students, because this final examination is one, it is individual effort. And number two, if your course has those content that you want to focus on in terms of cognitive, that's where the traditional assessment is warranted or is justified. Okay? So that is where it is common to see where students get 50 something out of 60 in the CAM marks, but in the final examination they only get 22 out of 40. Okay, and then when you see the correlation, you see there's no correlation. It's okay, okay? Because one has a different spirit from the other. Okay, all right. So on the traditional, maybe I should skip. Okay, so maybe I should go to the next thing, because I see that a lot of us are using rubrics for our alternative assessment. So maybe I want to just go straight to rubrics. Yeah. Dr. Zainuddin earlier mentioned about holistic rubrics and the analytic rubrics. Yeah. So if you want to go on the performance-based and alternative assessment paradigm, the best rubrics for performance assessment is not the holistic, okay? Because to do a holistic rubrics, it helps us in terms of speedy marking, easy to give marks. But if it is alternative assessment, remember, alternative assessment is not about just giving the students marks. It's about giving them feedback that help them to learn better as they go on and on with the task. Okay, so a more suitable rubric is the analytic rubric. And how to come up with all these rubrics? I share with you here some of the YouTube. There are so many YouTubes that show you how to design the rubrics. But I want you to just, if we go for alternative assessment, yeah, and you want to use rubrics, I'm sure all of us are very familiar with rubrics. So these are the rubrics, easy, simple, very complicated looking. But it is important to be aware that in alternative assessment, you must have these two components in your rubrics. Okay, so what are the two components? The first one is the criteria. So that's the vertical. And then the next one is the level of performance. Okay, why is it? Because remember, in alternative assessment, it's not about just giving students the grades, but it's for them to know by doing the task, what are their weaknesses and where are their weaknesses, and what are their strengths, and what are their and in which area are their strengths. So criteria is the vertical. Sometimes the criteria is here, but these are the two main components that you must have in a rubrics if you practice alternative assessment. Okay, how do you know what are the criteria? What criteria to put, okay, in your rubrics? Remember much earlier in my earlier slide, I asked you what is it that you want to develop? If you want to develop, obviously, what is it that you want to develop? Obviously, from this rubric, I want to develop the students' ability in organizing, understanding of the topic, how they cite or synthesize information from different sources, and so this is language, and develop their written language. Okay, so these criteria is your choice of what is it that you want to develop in the students when they do the task or when they complete the task. Okay, and these criteria cannot necessarily just be content, but remember just now we have attributes and we have skills. So this is where, for example, I can have one here, teamwork. So if teamwork is something that is important to develop in the task, so one of the criteria here is probably teamwork. Okay? And if, for example, another attribute, time management. So if time management is what you want to develop, so that is what you want to give feedback to the students. So one of the criteria here in the rubrics is probably time management. All right. So criteria, depending on what you want to give focus on for the students' learning. 2 is the level of performance. Okay. So for each criteria, you have to have the level of performance. Why? Because of feedback purposes. Okay. Feedback is about they want to know where they are. So in terms of organization, if I tick here, if I tick 3, I give the rubric back to the students so they know in terms of organization for that task at that point of time, I am good. So that is a feedback. Okay. My report, my draft. So if a student completes a draft and then submit it to us, and then I tick 2 for criteria number 4. So then it is a feedback to the students that for that draft, this is the level of language and written competency as far as writing the report is at that point of time in completing the task. So that is what is meant by feedback. So if you have a holistic rubric, then holistic rubric may possibly not have the level of performance. So when you don't have the level of performance, it gives less information about the weaknesses and strength to the students, their weaknesses and strength to the students. And therefore, the value of the rubrics in terms of feedback is lesser. So that is where I recommend that if you want to go for rubrics like these, so make sure you use the holistic in such that it becomes more useful in terms of utility as a feedback tool. Okay, so there. Okay, so I just want to share what I got. Okay, so there is the criteria and then level of performance. Okay, so if I give a problem solving, so if you give a problem solving question, so these are the 3 criteria that we look at in terms of assessing. So these are the 3 criteria that you want to, the students will give focus when they do their problem solving. And when they get the rubrics back, so the descriptor will tell them where they are. So in terms of whether they are good, so in other words, their strength, or whether they are just at apprentice level. So that's where they know where their weakness is. Okay. I think Dr. Zainuddin has something to say about rubrics. From his facial expression, I can tell. Or is there any question at this point? Or comment?
Prof. Ainol?
Yes?
I think, one of the problems that I've been having with rubrics, that the length of the rubric, so we can have, like, say, like this one, the example that you showed is a 4-point scale where you have novice, apprentice, practitioner, and expert. And if we want to make the scale longer, that would help us with higher reliability, then we have to have a description for every level, right? Then that would actually help. Hello?
Yes, yes, yeah.
Yeah. So you know what happens with me usually is that when I have this kind of rubrics that's a bit short and not long enough, I tend to sort of cluster many students in the same category. I'm not able to, as you say, discriminate or differentiate between different levels of ability. You know, so there's always this problem for me that I want to stretch the rating scale to make it longer, just to give me higher reliability. At the same time, the problem of trying to put descriptors at every point level. So I'm not sure if other people also face the same problem. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for pointing out. There's one important point to say here that highlighted by Prof. Noli in terms of how many performance level do you want to have. Sometimes some people just say, just write like this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, what Prof. Noli was saying is that the smaller, the lesser you have in the scale of the performance, we tend to give similar marks to students. But if you have it's just like a ruler. The longer the ruler, the easier to put students along the continuum, right? But the problem with having a very long ruler is because you have all these descriptors to fill in. So therefore, they have difficulty to come up with the different adjectives or different descriptors to differentiate one point to the other. Okay. But allow me to move on. Maybe I just want to share with you the next slide on rubrics that can be used online, yeah, that I have used in my sorry. In the meantime, is there any comments or question? Any comments or question? If not, I just want to share at the end of
Okay, sorry, Prof.
Yes.
Can I just ask, just pass the questions that actually posted in YouTube? Okay, so there's one question in YouTube from Brother Shamsuddin in CFS. He asks, does breaking up a 40% final exam into smaller parts, like 20% test, 20% test, 20% test 1, 22% test 2, and done it through test online would be a viable option?
Okay, in this emergency remote teaching and learning period, I think that is in terms of there are two ways to answer. One is in terms of the principle of assessment. The other one is whether it's allowable in terms of administrative and following KCA, Dr. Zainuri, guideline. So I'll go for the principle first. According to the principle, so final examination has the same principle as a midterm test and the same paradigm as short quizzes, because these are assessment of learning and these are very product oriented. So in terms of principle, yes, that means if you want to cut your cake of 40% of the final exam into viable assessments during the ERTL period, so you cut it into little quizzes, and then only 10% is final thing in the online. So yes, you can, because they all follow the same principles. Okay? And possibly also, they will all be the same learning outcome, based on the same learning outcome. So yes to the two questions. One is that in terms of what the rules, in terms of the rules, I'm sure KCA will allow that to happen because only for this period of time. And then in terms of principle, yes, that means you will not violate the principle of assessment if you cut your 40% into different small tests. Yeah. Okay, thank you, Dr. Mira. Maybe there are other questions? Are there other questions in the...
Hello, Assalamualaikum, Prof. Ainol.
Waalaikumsalam.
Though the matter has been already discussed, I just wanted to know regarding final examination, can we just make it open book and we can set that kind of question? So what is your views on the open book exam once again? Sorry for asking again. Thank you.
Okay, now open book has the same principle, except for it is not the same principle as final examination, because that is, there are product oriented, which is the students are given questions, but instead of coming to the class and do it in 3 hours or 2 hours, you give them to do at home. But the danger is you have to go back to your course learning outcomes, okay? Because there are more time given to the students. So you just have to be rest assured that if it is the same question, it cannot be the same question that you ask in a final exam paper that you give them as the take-home exam, okay? Because it's not fair. So in other words, it's not fair. Why? Because one, of course, they will have more time, okay? And two, they will have access to the answers. So in the exam hall, they don't have access to the answer.
No, sorry, Prof. The time will be the same. For example, on 25th of August, the final exam from 10 to 1 o'clock. So we can give the same time. They have to use the same time. Everybody, it is a synchronized test. But instead of face-to-face, they will be just writing on their computer and they will be sending through email. That's my point, actually.
Okay. But will they have access to materials?
It is open book because the questions will be asked accordingly so that there is no answer in the book. So they have to be creative.
Yes. No, yes. So that's the caveat. The caveat is, or the thing to be very careful about is that the type of question, the thinking process, in doing in answering the question, the thinking process should not be the same thinking process in the exam hall. Yeah. So your questions will have to be problem based.
Yeah, of course.
Yes.
Yeah,
Cannot be the kind of questions that you give in the final exam, because in the final exam, they don't have access to the material in front of them.
Yeah. But can it be done, Prof, right?
It can be done, but there are a few principles that you have to follow. I think now that Dr. Zainuddin agrees to do a session on take-home exam, I think it's very important to be aware of the principles behind take-home exam, so that when you design, just like when we design our assessment task just now, when you design your questions for take-home, you will not violate the principles of a take-home exam.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, Prof.
Okay, you're welcome. Any other question?
Dr. Ainol, I'm Haslina here.
Okay, Haslina.
I use Rubric as my AA, but then I have difficulties in giving marks to group assignments, group work. Like who among them are free riders, who does not participate in all the processes. So you have Do you have any suggestions for that?
Okay. Okay, so that's a very good question. So that's where your design of the rubrics is very important to identify the criteria. So from your question, I will conclude that you want those two attributes to be measured in the rubric. One is uh, they have teamwork. Everybody contributes, yeah. The teamwork skill is there because they're not getting the marks because it's somebody else's job. So teamwork. Number two is that yes, so probably that one. So if you want a teamwork, so if you want to squeeze it within one rubrics, maybe it's not fair. Yeah. So perhaps you want to take out that into a different rubric altogether, and perhaps it's probably not done by you. So maybe that can be done by their peers. So you can have a peer assessment. So their friends give marks to their contribution. Yeah, this contribution is part of teamwork. So you want to assess, you want to give marks for teamwork. So if you want to squeeze it in that rubrics that has other criteria, for example, can you just give Dr. Aslina two things that you have in the rubrics, two criteria?
Macam mana? Tak ingat dah. Dah lama dah tak tengok.
Content. One marks on content, and then the other one is organization.
Content kan? Content. I just want to know whether everybody contributes to that part, or everybody contributes to the contributes to the write-up of the project, for instance.
Okay. So I would suggest that do not squeeze that attribute. That means you want to measure teamwork skills, right? So you want to put it as one of the assessment criteria. So to be fair to the students, don't put it in that same rubric as the content, where you have content and organization or whatever else. Put it somewhere else. Have another rubric for contribution and teamwork, and the best person to give marks for this is not us, because we're not there in the process. Okay? So maybe you can give them, if it is a project at a field work, you can probably give to the organizer, or to their peers, so they can rate each other.
Okay, Dr. Ainol, clear. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other question?
Assalamualaikum.
Salam.
Yeah, regarding to the rubric for this what we call group or teamwork is very difficult, because if we are in the physical places, we can can evaluate the student who participate more. And then, for example, for my courses in phonology, for example, I put the rubric criteria. When in the class, when they present face to face, I can judge who is participating more, who is not participating, especially the oral presentation. But if it is AAS, alternative assessment, it's very difficult to distinguish between the teamwork, who will be getting more, who will be getting less. That's very difficult for me. So what shall I do in this case?
Okay.
Yeah.
That is where we have to make the decision that sometimes for some attributes like that, it's a bit tricky. We don't want to give marks, but rather feedback. Okay? Because at the end of the day, we have to answer. We have to be fair. We have to answer to God that being fair. We give 5 out of 5 for teamwork, but is the 5 justified? Because we're not with the students in doing the project, but we think that we know that this person is not contributing. But how right are you in your thinking to say that, for this person I give only 1 because I don't think she's contributing, as compared to second person I give a 5. So sometimes you want to encourage teamwork, but you may not necessarily give marks. You can give feedback. okay, which is part of the assessment, but is only for formative purposes. And sometimes I do that in the class, that every now and then students give self-assessment of their friends, but only for formative purposes.
Yeah, formative course, formative, yes.
But at the end of the day, there's no grades to it. But they will compile 2-3 feedback from their friends in the whole semester. And then I get a copy, or I also keep a copy. And then, you know, they themselves will see how others perceive them in terms of their contribution. And that itself is a learning process. Because at the end of the day, remember, the strength of alternative assessment is not just about, at the end of completing the task, is getting the grades, but the experience of completing the task give them the opportunity to develop themselves in the different competencies. Okay?
Okay, Prof, thank you.
Assalamualaikum, Prof. Fitri from course. I would like to ask just about because if we wanted to substitute our final exam with alternative assessment, when should we do it? Can we do it before the final exam? Normally we do it on after week 14, but since we have substituted it with alternative assessment, can we do it earlier than that?
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, that is a very good question. I also have the question for my course, but I think that is administrative, right? I know in the ERTL document guideline.
Yes, administrative.
Yes, kuliahs are supposed to come up with their guideline for the lecturers. So actually, at the Kuliah of Education this afternoon at 2:30, we are drawing up our kuliah level guideline to guide lecturers if they want to keep their final examination as a summative assessment, and they want to redesign it because of all the issues to tackle. So we're going to give guidelines if they can cut it into a few pieces, or if they want to have some online and some
yes.
face. That I think you will have to get from your kuliah.
Okay. So that one is from kuliah level, Prof.
At the kuliah level. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
But I know that KCA is Dr. Zainuddin. Correct me if I'm wrong. Because of the ERTL mode that we are in now, we are given the opportunity to do changes to the courses that we are teaching to suit the situation that we are now. So in other words, we have the opportunity, except for there must be some standardization. So kuliahs have to draw up that guidelines. Is that true, KCA, Dr. Zainuddin?
That is about right, but we need to work closely with the guidelines because you have to understand there are two guidelines now. One is from KPT, the other one is from our own Sejahtera Council. So work closely with these two guidelines. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right. Okay, time is running out. So I just want to show you very quickly how I've used the Pathbright. Pathbright, I'm sure many of you have used it. It's a platform for online learning. And how I have used the rubrics in my assignment. For one of my courses, which is like final examination, but because they have to answer questions, but what they get is not just marks, because I use rubrics, so they know their weaknesses and strength in the question that they answer. Okay, so this is a question. Okay, in the beauty, I'm sure iTaklin also has that. You can actually open your questions over a duration of time. So you can open it for just 1 hour. Everybody must answer the question within 1 hour. So this question is exactly the same question that I have in a final exam, but I put it out in this Pathbright, and I gave a time limit within 1 hour. Everybody has to get in and answer the question. Okay, and they can answer it from anywhere because Pathbright you can also use their handphone. All right. So when they answer this question was, okay, is there anything wrong with the verb that is used in the sentences? And then if there is anything wrong, explain what's wrong and explain what's right. Now, explain the correction. Yeah. So see, the timing is given. So when they answer the question, now, rubrics, you must show the students. When you give the assessment task, you must also give the assessment rubrics, the assessment tools, so that they know what to do and they know what are the expectations. Okay. So see, in answering the question just now, they know that there are 3 things that they have to watch out for when they answer the questions. 3 criteria: the instructional strategy, the content competency, and their communication skills, right? And these are the performance standards, performance level, okay? For some up to 8, for some up to 4, so you can vary. So when they get their marks, after they have finished, after 1 hour is done, so in the evening when I'm done with my marking at home, so they will get their marks, 8/12, somebody 10/12, somebody 7/12. They don't just know that they get 7 or 10 or 12/12, but they know that their 7/12 or 8/12 or 9/12 are based on 3 things, 3 criteria, and for each criteria where they are. Okay. So unlike in final examination or in quiz or in test 1 or in midterm, in which when you give marks, 8/10 to answer that questions, they don't know why they get 8. But if you use rubrics, they know why they get 8 and they get 8. Their strength in getting the 8 is in which area. Okay. So in other words,
Oi. Sorry.
What?
No, my cat.
Okay. So in short, and in summary, what I want to emphasize here in summary is that in looking for an alternative for your final examination, one, you have to be very careful in that you have to be fair to the students. Don't change your final examination in such that you also change the course learning outcome, because now instead of demonstrating their ability in terms of content 40%, because you change from a content-based assessment, which is test, to problem-based, now they have to demonstrate some other things. So that's not fair. All right. But if you do want to keep your final examinations, there are many ways to actually ask questions, content-based questions that can be used online. And the last bit that I've shown here, using the Pathbright and using the rating scale, can be beneficial because students don't just get marks, but also they get to know where they are good at and where their weaknesses are in answering those questions. Okay, so with that, I think I've passed the time. I would like to thank you for all your attention. I'm sure you have many questions, so if you have questions, I'm more than happy to attend to your questions in the email, inshallah. With that, again, I would like to thank CPD for this opportunity. This is my first time doing an online training, and I hope, inshallah, it's not going to be my last. Okay? Everything that is good from this session is all from Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, and all weaknesses are mine. With that, thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi
wabarakatuh. Thank you, Prof. Ainol.
Thank you very much.
Prof. Ainol, more sessions, please, inshallah.
Inshallah.
Inshallah, inshallah.
Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Mira.
Okay, all right. So thank you so much, Prof. And I really appreciate on behalf of CPD and from all of us, we really appreciate the time and the knowledge that you have shared with us. May Allah bless you with barakah and your family as well. May Allah give you the strength and the courage to give more, mashallah, because we still, I think it is not enough for one session. We still have a lot more questions to ask, but due to the time constraint, inshallah, we will have another sessions in the future. And to all participants who have any questions in YouTube, but we haven't managed to answer, please feel free to send the questions through email. And inshallah, I will try to forward to Prof. Ainol, and then, or perhaps you can also contact Prof. Ainol directly, just in case there are specific questions that you want her to answer. So thank you so much, Prof. Jazakumullah khair wa barakallahu fikum jami'an. And thank you so much for everyone. Inshallah, we will have the closing sessions of e-learning clinic, which is the last event of e-learning clinic 2.0. It will be this afternoon from 3 to 4:30 p.m. The link will be sent to you about maybe half an hour or 45 minutes before the session, just to make sure that we have arranged everything properly. And again, I really appreciate Prof. Ainol for the time again, and everyone for joining us in this 9th session. May Allah give us the strength to have another session soon with Dr. Zain, with a lot more speakers, because we have to make sure that we covered all of the issues when it comes to online teaching, inshallah. So again, barakallahu fikum jami'an, jazakumullah khair, subhanakallahumma bihamdik, asyhadu an la ilaha illa anta, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilaik. Thank you so much. I'll see you this afternoon, inshallah. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Syukran jazilan.